So we're on week 12. We made it through our whole course. So today we're talking about combating misinformation. And this is really important in the era of generative AI because it's really easy to write stuff with generative AI. Like I wanted to write a LinkedIn post yesterday and I just typed in a prompt and it just came up with a LinkedIn post and it took me like all of 2 seconds. And normally it would take me probably like an hour, maybe 2 hours to get all the details right, but I felt like it did a good job. I wanted to write some tweets. I went to perplexity.ai and I told it what all I wanted to do. And it like, because I just founded hashtag Scientists for Harris, which is scientists that are interested in electing Kamala Harris for president, because I couldn't believe here in the US, because I couldn't believe there isn't one of those. So I decided I would write some countdown tweets. So I told perplexity.ai, hey, you're a social media coordinator for hashtag Scientists for Harris, which is responsible for a social media account electing Kamala Harris. So right, starting with yesterday was 99 days, I think, until the election. It was like right 100 like tweets counting down until November 5th. And I just explained it like this. And then that have facts about Kamala's Harris's support for science. And so it actually did it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that took like 2 seconds to just write the prompt. And it wasn't even grammatical in my mind. So that's really powerful, but just think of all the ways that people that want to do misinformation can use that same technology. I mentioned this in the last slide, but I guess I'll just sort of mention it here that we talk about misinformation as going viral, but in a way, it kind of goes nuclear. And there was this guy in TechCrunch that just wrote an article about that it's not just going viral, it's just going nuclear. So it's pretty hard to go nuclear with facts, but there are some ways to do that. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this lecture. So last time we talked about strategic communications, public relations, and marketing. We discussed communicating with a goal versus communicating just to say something. We talked about the disconnect between the communications world and the science world. So today we're going to talk about misinformation. So congrats on making it to the final lecture in this course. By the end of this lecture, you will know everything you need to be an unstoppable, goal-oriented science communicator. And honestly, you already do know everything you need to be an unstoppable communicator, but it's important to think about misinformation because as scientists, a lot of our work is just explaining the actual facts to people in a way that is factual and also not politicized. So here we're talking about journalism. So journalism is a great way to get information, science journalism. A few basics that great journalism requires is diversity of sources, factual reporting, and providing value to readers. So you want to make sure that your sources draw from like a very diverse group of people. I just read this article that said that science journalists, apparently they tend to exclude people that have ethnic names. And I was really annoyed by that because I have an ethnic name. So I was like, well, crap. So we should definitely work hard to find sources that are diverse, diversity of background, diversity of thought, without doing the two sides thing if there's not really two sides, and that's a really hard balance to get. And of course, factual reporting. You don't want to report things that are not true as a science journalist, because that people stop listening to you. And then lastly, providing value to readers. Journalism is a service, so we want to serve people with information that can help them make better decisions and help them live better lives, which we don't really think about journalism as doing that. I'm not sure if journalists as a whole think about journalism as that, because there's also this prestige that comes along with journalism. So, but I, as a scientist journalist, I like to say I'm a neuroscientist journalist, really think we should really focus on this service aspect of journalism. So what makes journalism great? Diversity of opinion is crucial. Reaching out to people in communities that don't get reported about in traditional news helps deliver the story better and make your story more applicable to a larger population. I just already talked about the biased study, the study that showed that science journalists don't include people with non-Western names as much as people with Western names. So that kind of sucks. And there's no way to really know about these things in a way unless you either have lived experience of it or you do a scientific study. And for scientists, data is always what's most compelling to them. So I guess we just have to do studies of things that we anecdotally find true, kind of going back to my one lecture that I did about structural inequality and sociology of science. So journalists have to report facts, not opinions presented as facts. It's a service discipline. I guess I kind of already said all of this. That should offer value to readers by helping them understand something they otherwise would not know. You don't have to be a seasoned journalist to know what makes an article good or great. It's kind of like that saying, I don't know art, but I know what I like. Like, I don't know, like, even if you're not a journalist, you can, things that are easy to read, that are factual, that are present everything you need to make an informed decision are examples of great journalism. So here we're talking about misinformation versus disinformation, and they're actually kind of different. So misinformation is incorrect or misleading information. Disinformation is false information created deliberately and spread to mislead or deceive. So in the pandemic, an example of disinformation, which I'm sorry to say ran counter to my own work, is the Pentagon ran a secret anti-vax campaign to incite fear to discredit Sinovac, which was a COVID vaccine developed in China. And so I forget what country it was in. It was like in an Asian country. And the Pentagon, I think they did a digital media campaign. So when I read this news, I was kind of upset because a lot of the work I did in the COVID pandemic was in digital media, and digital media isn't just constrained to one location, it's kind of global. So basically, thanks to the Pentagon, probably many people died because of their secret anti-vax campaign. And I guess it got reported and discovered in Reuters. I didn't read the article, so I think I skimmed it. But that's an example of disinformation. And I don't know if they have scientists working at the Pentagon, but I feel like they could have done a lot better job and like maybe discredited if they really wanted to discredit Sinovac, which as far as I know, there's nothing really wrong with Sinovac, but like it was a vaccine just like Sputnik 5 was like Russia's. I guess we didn't do a disinformation campaign for them, but so the government created false information on purpose, just on purpose to mislead or deceive. That's an example of disinformation. And unfortunately, in that case, disinformation likely cost people their lives if they actually believed it. Like maybe the people reading those tweets could know that, or whatever they were. I think they were like tweets and stuff, but I have to go back and check. But that's an example of disinformation that, in my opinion, is kind of tragic. I don't know the details of it. Maybe reporters will uncover more details about it, and we'll find out exactly what they did. So frustrating, because like literally our challenge back then was like trying to get people to like love science enough to be engaged with it. But anyway, misinformation is another thing that was like really big on Twitter. I think I tweeted about vaccines one day, and then like I swear QAnon wrote back to me and just wrote like lol. And that was like one of the weirdest moments I've ever had as a digital media professional. So misinformation, misunderstandings about the science of COVID-19 led to often unintentional but widespread misinformation about the virus. And it wasn't even like, sometimes it was like coordinated campaigns to disinform, but other times it's just like someone came up with a tweet. Like I remember it was like COVID vaccines have 5G. And I was like, I wish COVID vaccines had 5G because then I could like check my email every time I got my COVID vaccine and just like do it through my mind or something. But that's not how vaccines work. So we saw way too much of both disinformation and misinformation in the pandemic. And it's misinformation comes from sometimes misleading information, things that information that happens on accident. Like maybe the Pentagon ran their disinformation campaign and it was successful and they achieved their objectives and it didn't really like kill a lot of people outside of the, hopefully it didn't kill a lot of people, just because I know that governments do these different campaigns too that basically involve propaganda and like, but yeah, I find that fascinating. Just remember in COVID when it first started, it was kind of like a free for all and everyone was just like in this new uncharted territory. And it's amazing the kinds of things we're learning in the postmortem, which is the worst metaphor ever for it, but the pandemic SciComm postmortem is like kind of wild. So here's some ways to combat misinformation. These don't go nuclear, by the way. These are just strategies that you can use to combat misinformation. And one way to combat misinformation that you can do is to pre-bunk something. So like, let's say someone, so like, I think that Joe Biden and Donald Trump had this happening. So, and I don't know if it was necessarily misinformation, but this is how the strategy works. So like, Donald Trump was talking, then it was Joe Biden's turn, and and it was going to be Donald Trump's turn to talk again, and Joe Biden was like, look, my opponent's going to tell you X, Y, and Z, and here's why those things are all false. So he was pre-bunking whatever Donald Trump was going to say. And so in the political world, I think politicians are huge purveyors of misinformation and they spread so much misinformation, especially because they're not scientists. So a lot of scientific misinformation. But one strategy you can learn from them is like this pre-bunking thing, and you can use that as a fact-checking mechanism. Depending on who you're talking to, always know your audience and communicate for your audience. The other thing is critical thinking skills. Being critical, looking to the facts and evidence, that's what we do as scientists anyway. So just apply that to misinformation that you see online. And finally, seeking out reliable sources of information. We all have our go-to sources of information that we like, especially as scientists, because we value factual information. So being able to look for bias, trying to figure out if someone has an agenda, seeing if they have conflicts of interest, reading about the authors whose articles you read. Sometimes I just Google them and I read about them to see who they are. And sometimes I'm surprised that they have conflicts of interest. Sometimes I'm not. Obviously, misinformation poses a huge threat to science communication. There was a lot of fake news. I was tired of watching it every day on the news and journalism. I think the worst part of it was like breaking news, where it was like a journalist that had no science background would just like they would like state something that someone in politics said, and it usually involves science, and the science wasn't like totally correct. So then they've tweeted some breaking news with some incorrect science, and obviously everyone retweeted the breaking news because it was breaking news, and so then everyone got this misinformation blast, and I was just like, I don't even know what to do about this. So that's how it kind of goes, and that happened all the time with the breaking news of COVID. And so, I mean, fake news undermines the legitimacy of science journalism, and it makes people not want to read science journalism, or it can convince them of things that are not true. It can make scientists very defensive, and then they try to like clap back, and then they politicize things and get angry, and that just isn't productive. So fake news undermines science literacy. So we want to be mindful of it, try to see when it's happening, pre-bunk it if possible. If it's not possible, there's really no real way to besides asking breaking news reporters to like take science courses or teach breaking news reporters more science, because because they wanted to do writing, like maybe they've never taken a math or science class in college. Like, I'm not sure. I went to MIT and we were required to take all these math classes, but apparently other places you don't have to take all these math and science classes. So maybe that's why I would love to see some scientists breaking news reporters, but I don't think that's an opportunity that is really open to people outside of people that have degrees in journalism, but we'll see. Maybe thanks to this course, we'll inspire some breaking news journalists with a science background. It is possible. It just requires hobnobbing with journalists, and that's not something you do as a scientist necessarily, maybe post-pandemic, but I don't know. Okay, so I already talked about misinformation in the era of ChatGPT, writers everywhere getting replaced by ChatGPT. I do this thing now where sometimes when I'm really struggling with writing, I'll just go to ChatGPT and then ask it to help me. And then in the process of doing this, I usually save like 20 hours. And then I'm like, wow, I just saved 20 hours of build time, which for me, I get paid $250 an hour. So that what is that, like $4,000 or more? So I have this realization, it's like a dual realization of like, wow, my work was so fast. And then it was also like, wow, I'm getting paid so much less for this because ChatGPT exists. But it's kind of entertaining. But it's really, ChatGPT is really powerful, especially if you can write prompts that are very specific and tell the GPT to like do really specific types of writing or like take specific inputs to do stuff. That's where it really shines. But then you still have, I find that I still have to fact check it. So it's a large language model trained on a vast amount of text data to generate human-like responses to prompts. People have called it fancy autocomplete, and it kind of is, but it's prone to hallucination, which makes it less useful, especially when it doesn't know about something like many topics in science, because there's just not that much stuff out there, or maybe not in its training set. It doesn't know how to say, I don't know, and it just makes up stuff, which is like really, really bad for science. So combating misinformation is even more crucial in the ChatGPT era, and it's probably like one of the biggest challenges that we have in the Gen AI era. So here's the headline from the TechCrunch article where I said disinformation goes nuclear rather than goes viral, because we always talk about stuff going viral, because that's how like COVID went viral. But disinformation, I guess specifically disinformation, not misinformation. So like these targeted like campaigns of false information just go nuclear. And I'm not really sure what the solution is. Just like maybe nuclear, some kind of nuclear non-proliferation of SciComm or something, or like you could either go more nuclear or just completely find a way to delegitimize the disinformation, but there's not like a really good strategy there. So maybe we'll just have to be observant and see like what's going on with our nuclear disinformation and where it ends up. I see tons of misinformation online everywhere where like someone will post something and it was either created by generative AI or it was like not what they said it was, and they just like it went viral anyway because everyone was like, oh wow, look at that, and they'd like retweet it, but then it was false. So congrats on making it through all the lectures. I feel like this one was especially rambly, but it's been amazing to have you in class. It's been fun and exciting teaching this class, my first science communication class ever. And I hope everyone tuning into the lectures, whether on YouTube or in this lecture, finds the course helpful in your future endeavors.